Greetings, fellow Habura members. My name is Eddie Mishaan from New York, New York, and I was asked to give a few thoughts on this week's Parasha, Parashat Vayiqra. This is the first Parasha that deals in detail with Korbanot. Of course, we've seen them before, but here we have a lot of details, and the entire Parasha deals with Korbanot. Of course, the beginning of the Parasha, we have the laws of the Ola, the Minha, and the Shelamim, which can all be brought as voluntary Korbanot, and in the later part of the Parasha, we have the laws of the Hattat and the Asham, which are brought for certain sins. Now, a lot of people in today's day and age may be a little uncomfortable with this parasha. They say, animal sacrifice, aren't we supposed to be a little bit more sophisticated nowadays? And besides, doesn't Harambam say that the sacrifices were only instituted to wean the people off of Avodah Zarah? And besides, even many of the Nebi'im say that God didn't want sacrifices. So I'm going to hope to address all that fairly briefly over here. In the guide, section 3, chapter 32, Harambam states that the sacrifices were instituted, their main purpose, as the purpose of worship of God, was to allow Bnei Israel to recognize Him. As he says, right? And they would come to that recognition through worship of Him. And the mode of worship was to be animal sacrifice, mainly, since that was what people were used to in those days. So, one might say from that, the korbanot are less than ideal, and maybe we shouldn't do them, or maybe they won't happen in the Mashiach going forward. And I'll address that in a minute. Now, Harambam actually himself in that chapter quotes some of the Nebi'im that admonish the people about their korbanot. And he points out that next to those quotes, he talks about them having, wrong ideas, very wrong ideas about God. I'll read an example. He doesn't quote this directly, but I have it in the commentary here. I'm reading from the Makbili edition. It's a very good edition. And the side here, they bring a more fulsome quote from the section of Yirmiyah that he refers to. Yirmiyah says, "Hagano brasoh v'naof v'shabat the v'qatir l'ba'al v'haloch ahare Elohim ahirim asher lo yeda'atem." Are you doing all these sins, stealing, adultery, and of course avodah zarah? ובאתם ועמדתם לפניי בבית הזה אשר נקרא שמי עליו ואמרתם נסלנו למען לעשות את כל התועבות האלה. And God says, you come and stand before me in this house, and now you say, we're okay, because now we brought our sacrifices, now we can do all these sins, right? That's Yirmiyahu admonishing the people. So Harambam points out that he's not admonishing them because of the sacrifices and saying that God does not want the sacrifices. Rather, the admonishment is because they're missing the primary purpose of the mitzvah. And they're thinking that the secondary item, being the sacrifices themselves, are the ikkar, right? So, if you basically bring the sacrifices without trying to reach that goal of recognition of God, and in fact doing the opposite, then that's really not what you should be doing. Now, the question comes up, of course, well, like we said, this was to wean people off the practice of Avodah Zarah, and, if I agree, Harambam would probably agree, if the Torah were given today, sacrifices would probably not be, animal sacrifices would probably not be included. So, perhaps when Mashiach comes, we will not reinstitute sacrifices. And many people believe that on their own. Many people believe that that was Harambam's opinion. It's pretty clear to me that it was not his opinion. I'm reading now from Mishneh Torah, Hilchot Melachim U'Melhamot, Perek Ahad Asar. It's the second to last chapter in all of Mishneh Torah. He starts the Perek by saying, "Hamelech HaMashiach Atid La'amod U'Lahazir Melchut Bet David Liyoshnaha HaMemshalah HaRishona U'Bonei Mikdash U'Mekabez Nechei Yisrael Ve'Hozrin Kol HaMishpatim B'Yamav K'Shayu Mekodem Makribin Korbanot Ve'Osin Shemitim V'Yobelot K'Chol Mitzvatan HaAmorot B'Torah." He's very clear there that the Melech HaMashiach will not only rebuild the Mikdash, and they will bring Korbanot in the Mikdash. He could have been ambiguous about that. If he didn't really believe it, he could have stayed a little ambiguous. But he was very explicit about it. And a little bit later on in the Perek, he states thusly, ועיקר הדברים ככה הן, שהתורה הזאת אין חוקיה ומשפטיה משתנים לעולם ולעולמי עולמים, ואין מוסיפין עליהן ולא גורעים מהן. So he's very, very clear here that the laws of the Torah do not change. Of course, we have the Rabbanans that are added on top, but those are not meant to be added to the body of the Torah. Those are in a separate category, which he deals with in the introduction. But he deals with the introduction and deals with it here, just to be very clear. So now, after all this, we say, fine, so technically, yes, we're going to have sacrifices when we have the Mashiach and the new Bet Midrash, but we're too sophisticated now. How is a person with a 21st century mind going to bring an animal sacrifice and have it mean anything to him, let alone not be disgusted, by slaughtering an animal in a temple? So I want to read to you a little bit from Tehillim Mizmor 50, which I think is gives some good examples. So there, I'll summarize a little bit. But God says basically, I don't need your korbanot. I don't get hungry. I don't need the sheep and rams that you're offering me. Rather, he says, Zebach le'Elohim todah v'shalem ne'alyon nedarecha uqra'ini b'yom sarah hallesecha utchabbedani. He says, sacrifice to God as an offering of thanks, and fulfill your nedarim, your vows, and call on me, meaning pray to me on a troubled day, and I will save you, and then you will honor me. Right? So that's a key motivation there behind the korbanot. Right? Not that we're having the primitive belief of, oh, God's going to smite us if we don't bring korbanot. Right? We bring korbanot so that we can approach God at the Mikdash, humble ourselves before Him, and acknowledge His sovereignty. Right? He says other places in Tehillim, حد شألتي مئة أدوناي وتبقيش شبتي ببيت أدوناي كل يمي حياي لحزوت بنوعم أدوناي وبركر بهخلو. And he also says, كي طوب يوم بحسريخ من ألف بحارتي هستوفي في بيت أدوناي من دور بحول رشع. Right? I would rather spend one day in the house of God than 1,000 years in the tents of iniquity. And finally, I'll come back to this Mizmor here. He says, V'la rasha amar Elohim man lechel sapir hukai v'tesaberiti aleficha. To the evil man, if you're, as Yirmiyahu said, you're doing all these sins, don't bother. Right? And finally, I'll skip to the last pasuk. He says, ends on a positive note. He says, Zobeach todah yechabedanani v'sam derech ar'enu beyesha Elohim. He who offers a thanksgiving offering will honor me thereby. V'sam derech, and he who sets himself on a straight path, ar'enu beyesha Elohim. I will show him the salvation of God, and may we all merit to see the Mashiach with korbanot. B'mirabi amenu amen.